Hey everybody, how's it going? This is WebDM. I'm Jim Davis, and it is our Thursday live stream here, hanging out in the week before Thanksgiving, talking about Druids, the the second of D&D's Celtic combo for classes, and so it's a class that is near and dear to my heart. One of my first characters in Dungeons and Dragons, way back in the day of Second Edition, was a Druid that survived multiple TPKs. So I have a lot of strong nostalgia feels for the class, and we'll get into it because I find the fifth edition incarnation of it a bit a bit tricky, a bit clunky. So yeah, we'll get into that here in just a minute. But yeah, if you want to support the show, if you want to support us in what we're doing, you can head on over to Patreon and check us out there. We have something like 266 podcast episodes. This week's episode, we're talking about feasts in RPGs, all manner of feasting and banquets and heroes' welcomes and civic festivals and all things like that in your fantasy RPGs. So head on over there and check it out. So yeah, here we are, like the Druid, the other D&D's sort of fifth class, as it were. And I don't know, for me, like, so my second edition Druid was like survived multiple party wipes in a Chult campaign because they could turn into a bird and fly away, or a squirrel and flit about through the jungle while the rest of the party was being eaten by dinosaurs or captured by lizard folk or whatever it was that was going on with them. So I have a real fondness for Druids. I played a Codzilla in third edition. I played a Druid where multiple times I thought to myself, like, I'm really outshining other party members right now and need to rein it in. So I've seen the lofty heights. I've seen what Druids are capable of when they load themselves and their animal companions up with all manner of spells and go to town. And so I think the fifth edition Druid that's reined in a bit is a good call. I don't think that they need to be as powerful as they were in editions past or anything like that. But I find the execution of the Druid in fifth edition a little clunky, a little cumbersome. There's some real like sore spots in AC, low hit points, that kind of thing, durability, survivability. But it's still a solid caster with a strong utility power. And so even though there's like clunky execution and some issues that have persisted throughout the edition, I think that it's like it's definitely a class to hold on to improve. And yeah, so that's where we'll head here in a minute. But I want to see where y'all's thoughts are at. We got a couple of questions here before the the stream even started. If this is your first time catching us live, then be sure to ask your question with a big question word in front of it, in caps preferably. That way we can spot them out of the chat and get those questions answered. So Sean's asking, how might you handle a Druid without wild shape, or a Druid that only wants to use wild shape and no spells? I think these two questions really get to the heart that the Druid has these two magical concepts mashed together of like they're a full caster and they have this wild shape shifting power that no real other full caster even comes close to getting something like that. There's turn undead that clerics get, and there are other with channel divinity powers. Wizards and sorcerers and warlocks get of course, a whole bevy of non-spell magical abilities and the like. But to me, like, wild shape is this like central pillar, right? So to me, like handling a Druid without wild shape, I think there's already several options available in the subclasses of 5e, the Circle of Spores, Circle of Stars. Wild shape becomes a resource that the Druid can burn to gain a combat overlay or a buff, similar to like, barbarian rage. It's a, an admission that not every Druid needs to turn into animals. That connection, that thematic link is there because like D&D really is throwing together a hodgepodge of myths and legends and half-truths about a group of real people that didn't write anything down. And the group of people that wiped them out and saw them as an enemy deliberately destroyed any record of them and wrote their own accounts of what the Druids were like. So we don't really have a solid understanding of who the historic Druids were, which is another reason why I love the class. It tickles that historian itch in me, especially ancient history, you know. So yeah, I think the Druid ends up as this hodgepodge of class abilities and concepts and themes. It's like D&D has a very modern take on the separation of nature and whatever. So I don't know. I'm rambling because I think the class, the answer to your question, Sean, is how might I handle a Druid without wild shape? I'd make a wizard and give them the Druid spell list. And then a Druid that only wants to use wild shape and no spells, I'd probably make them some kind of barbarian. Like, go hard in on the shapeshifter that beast, the path of the beast kind of hints at. But, you know, let's make a full class that is a full shapeshifter. I know there's some solid third-party options out there that they kind of play around with that idea. But I think just like a combat shapeshifter, or my whole deal is I can alter my form, is worth its own like full class and to be elevated and as a, you know, a central feature of class ability kind of thing, not just a utility option unless you pick one specific subclass. So that is how I would do it. Magnus Murdoch asks, my group just wrapped up our third homebrew campaign last night. Congrats. Awesome. One of my players only wants to play complex casters, and she always struggles with it. 20-minute turns, spell choice panic. Everyone else is struggling to deal with her refusal to learn her class and play anything else. How can I coach her to play a caster or talk her into a martial class choice? I'm curious which casters she's tried, because there are certainly very complicated casters, right? Like, she's diving into warlock early and trying to like full caster warlock. That's going to be tricky. I mean, I think appropriately enough, Druid's a great pick for a first-time caster, because there are some Druid subclasses that you don't really have to worry too much about these other things on the side. You just manage your spells and like they expand your spell list. Like Circle of the Land is is basically like that. The Circle of the Moon can be played like that, right? Like, you can play the character as this sort of basic full caster, no bells and whistles. You get, you know, 2 starting cantrips and you know, your spell list. Most of them are concentration spells, so you're only juggling one spell effect at a time. You know, you got some solid fire and forget magic as well. And then if you need to, you can turn into like really cool animal forms and like tank for the party or scout, or, you know, like, it's a really versatile class for someone who maybe struggles with that, to kind of keep the spell options limited, and when they don't want to have to worry about the spell options, they have another thing they can do that is still effective, right? And that's sort of the understanding of it. But honestly, if the player wants to play these classes and then they're not like going home and reading the player's handbook and their spell lists, and I think it is a valid question to ask them at some point, like, do you really want to play one of these characters? And is there maybe something else that you want out of the game that you think the caster is going to get you? A lot of times that's cool buttons to push. You know, a new player sees, you know, a more experienced player playing a spellcaster. Wow, when it's your turn, things happen, right? Like the enemy drops, and they want something similar to that, but you know, that experienced player, you know, reads the player's handbook when they're just by themselves. They go through their spell lists. They pick out different suites of spells to have for different types of adventures they're going to go on. And then they know what their spells do. They've got the DCs ready to go and all things like that. And that's work. that's not fun unless you know, it's a certain kind of fun, I guess. But for many people, it's homework. And so I would suggest, like, either asking her if that's really what she wants, and if there's maybe not like a battle master or something simpler that she could go for, or like playing a really simple caster that doesn't involve a lot of choices and doesn't have a lot of ongoing spell effects to worry about. because the Druid spell list is heavy on concentration spells. Like defensive, offensive, doesn't matter. You're going to be concentrating a lot. So it's a relatively simple one to juggle. But yeah, it's a tough one because it can take a lot longer than not, especially if it doesn't seem like, 1 or 2 sessions where it's a 20-minute turn. I can understand. They're getting used to it. They're learning. And after a while, certainly after multiple campaigns, I would think like, maybe flashcards. I don't know, something to help with that. Limited spell selection. Yeah, I'm not sure. I once created a cheat sheet for a player from all of their classes' abilities and everything they could do. This was in 3rd edition. They were playing like a barbarian frenzied berserker or something. And they just wanted to be able to like kill giants in one hit. That was the really simple ask. But I basically, their problem was their character sheet was just terribly organized. The way they learned, the way they, assimilated information, the character sheet didn't help them at all. And so I had to like retype everything their character could do in a different format as like a menu of options that they could choose from to help them understand how to play their character, because it was like that ability to just not grasp how the rules work and what they could do in a turn that was preventing them from enjoying the game that they otherwise wanted to enjoy. So it might be worth the effort to really sit down with that player and go, what kind of character do you want? And find a way around this conundrum. But good question. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the Druid assessment here, and then we'll get to some more questions later on. But yeah, I hope you guys find a solution there, Magnus. All right. The Druids. Right. Great class, really versatile caster, right? You got some solid blaster, offensive, and control options, some really solid party support, utility and healing magic there. Really, it's a great spell list, a lot of iconic spells that are really only available to the Druid. I think that one of the things that I really like about the Druid is you can play them as just a nature mage. They're not much different than a wizard. And honestly, looking at their class feature breakdown, they share a lot in common with the wizard in that, they have this wide dearth from 2nd to 18th level where the base class doesn't get anything. It's all subclasses. And so I think that like thinking of them as a kind of nature wizard is an interesting place to start. And honestly, my favorite kind of druids, the druids in The Witcher 3, are essentially that. They're doing the same kind of magic as the Lodge of Sorceresses and other kinds of wizards in the setting, but like their approach to it, their philosophy behind it, the kinds of effects that they can get when they interact with, cosmic chaos and wring magic out of it are different. And I think that when I think of D&D wizards, and it's like they're doing magic that comes from the essence of nature, like there's all kinds of world building questions and implications going on in the Druid description, right? But setting that aside for a minute, maybe a different show about like all of the world building implications and the various class descriptions. Like, really, the world's made of only 4 elements? Go on. How does that work again, D&D? That seems really interesting. Please explain. D&D's had this kind of the Druid has this legacy of being a grab bag of thematic stuff that it kind of leaves it in 5th edition of like, well, what is this? What is this Druid here for? What are we trying to accomplish? What role do they have in the party? And I think it sort of shows that the 5th edition Druid is kind of clunky and has these weak spots because they're trying to like hold on to this legacy of what the Druid was, not make it completely overpowered like it can be, and at the same time like offer an interesting array of options. So really, I love the concept behind the Druid, but I find the 5th edition class very frustrating to play. Most of my character deaths that have come from the 5e have been Druids, and they've been like, man, I didn't, what? wait, what? Thanks for going so well last round. Unlike my barbarian deaths where it's like, I can see that coming. I've got 2 more rounds before I go down, kind of thing. And so I find the experience of playing a Druid sort of frustrating. I think their class abilities can kind of speak to why. Right off the bat, we've got a D8 hit dice and low armor proficiencies, and it creates a very like weak and fragile class. They don't have a lot of survivability outside of like moon druids, right? Moon druids are a different thing because they're doing all kinds of stuff with refreshing their hit point pool and things like that. Spore druids kind of make up for this as well with their temporary hit point pool. But like the base druid, if you're just trying to play like a caster druid, you don't really have a strong options for your spells to like boost your survivability that much. Like I said, a lot of them rely on concentration. So the fact that like starting off, you've got D8 hit die, which is great for a full caster, but then really no way to boost your AC in the base rules, right? Like I think that if you've got a druid in your party, a DM ought to be like, yeah, you can make armor out of, giant insect chitin and, the hides of magic beasts and things like that. So there it's equivalent to half plate or equivalent to a chain shirt, something like that. It's just not made of metal, right? And so it's like, I don't think the druid should have to suffer because the equipment list is garbage, and it is. And so I think it just kind of, to me, every druid I've played, I just look at their AC and it's like, she's 3 stats, like wisdom, con, and dex. Like, all right, can I just maybe have bark skin not be concentration? I'd take that. That sounds great. The rest of their proficiencies, I think, are kind of interesting. They've got this weird list of weapons that's definitely a legacy from Druids of editions past, but 5th edition really doesn't provide any justification for why that is. It just says, no, these are the weapons they can use. These are the armor they can use. They can't use metal for no reason. Whereas in editions past, they really go into the detail of like why this is. I've never bought it. From the minute I played Druids, I was like, wait, metal comes from the earth? Like, wait, they're wearing leather and using wooden things? That's taking a natural material and working it with your hands till it's something you can use. Like, that's just what we do with metal. Why is metal all of a sudden exempt, unnatural kind of things? So I am one of those DMs who will just, yeah, you can use whatever you like. We'll find a non-metal equivalent. And then we jump into another kind of weird class feature, the Druidic language. And to me, this is the legacy of the influence of what scant few pieces of information we know about a historic Druids. They're being sort of secretive, being a priesthood, a group of judges and oral historians, things like that. They share a lot in common with bards in that sense. I think there's a lot of overlap there, but it's this legacy feature in 5e that I don't know. I've never seen it really get used. It suggests a lot about the world and the place of druids in it. There really is a lot of world building going on in the class descriptions and the like before we get to the features. And I think like it suggests a kind of gameplay of D&D that the rules are like, yeah, you could do this. You could put all these pieces together. You could start weaving this into a cohesive whole where the druids represent an older faith, a faith that's based around a worship of natural forces in the world, elemental forces, fey forces, the influence of those planes on the material reality of the world, and keeping all of that harmonious and making sure that no one part of that equation gets too overmatched with the others, either through, because of intervention by, intelligent beings, or just because of the natural course of things, right? I think the description sort of suggests that druids have to keep the world in stasis, and not really the dynamism that nature actually has, which is, it's constantly in motion, constantly changing, and the like. So I just suggest this, and then the newer gods that represent the more moral alignments and moral philosophies. They are not the gods of the inner planes, but the gods of the outer planes, and clerics are their champions. Paladins swear oaths to them. And, it suggests this tension and the like between these two things that would require D&D to really like draw a line in the sand about religion and the place of it in the D&D world. And like, of course, DMs are free to do that themselves, but I think it's a missed opportunity for world building and customizing your campaign to not like call it out more than, this little sidebar that it gets, Anyway, the promise of all the world building implications of the druid is one thing, but Next class feature up, definitely spellcasting, core feature of the Druid. They've always been full casters. They started as a subclass of cleric. They have a very interesting spell list, very unique. I am constantly trying to wrap my head around it. I still feel like I don't. After playing 3-4 Druids, maybe? I can't, yeah. It's still just like, okay, well, wait, what am I doing now? Unlike a cleric or a wizard or the like, where you know what you're getting. It's easy to identify the role you're going to play in the party and choose spells to support it. With the Druid, I feel like I'm always struggling. And when I think of the times as a player that I look at my spells prepared list and go, man, I made the wrong choices. I would love to redo this spell list right now. I'm probably playing a Druid. And I rarely feel that way with cleric or wizard. If anything, I'm like, man, I'd love a reason to change up my spell list with those classes. So Druid, I struggle with this one. I find like too many of them have concentration as a requirement. My personal opinion on this one is that spells which offer you some kind of defense, either have no concentration requirement and some other way to prevent stacking. Or ones that you throw on someone else. It's like I've loosed this spell into the world. Could also be a different way. So I don't know. I'm not sure that there's a way to fix this other than to readjust which spells require concentration across the board. I'm not sure that they're going to do that with One D&D. All right, spells. They got all kinds of stuff. They get cast because they're spiritually in tune with the essence of nature in the D&D world. Next up, they have Wild Shape, which, this is one of those abilities that to me is iconic to the Druid. They're not a Druid if they can't also turn into animals, but the only reason I feel that way is because of D&D. So it really is one of those, snake eating its own tail kind of things. I think the chief problem here, and it's you can see it somewhat in the summoning spells of the Druid spell list as well, is that there's too much of the player asking to see the monster manual when they're playing a Druid. And there's a part of me that goes, oh yeah, but if it's a separate stat block for a bear when it's the player's controlling it and a bear when the DM's controlling it, is it the same bear? And I take that thought and I go out behind the shed and I beat it, because I do not think it's a helpful thought when playing D&D. I think it's okay that DMs and players use different rules and have different interfaces. A bear or a wolf or a hawk that a DM needs stats for is different than what a player needs stats for. And as long as there's some correspondence, as long as, say, speed, various abilities that those animals might have, like keen senses or dark vision, I think as long as those things stay the same, the individual stats of like how this attack looks and the like, hit points, armor class, all of that can be different between players and DMs. Because number one, the monster manual is for DMs. It's there as a resource, and everything in it is mutable. Everything in it is changeable. And the more you let the players in on it, the more they see it as these are the rules that are printed on the page. Any change from it is a change from the rules as printed. And to me, the conflicts over like, what kind of abilities do I get? What can I do with this? What kind of animals can I turn into to wreak the most havoc on this campaign? And the DM having to like, okay, well, no, or can you do this instead? It's simplified if it's like you have 3 forms you can turn into, what they look like, the kinds of animals they are. That is a matter of cosmetics, flavor, player preference. This is the stealth form. This is the combat brute form. This is the flyby attack form. This is the aquatic form. I think that's perfectly fine, and is acceptable for it, because like there's all kinds of weird things that go on with CR and levels and class abilities. It's just also, if you're playing a moon druid and all you have access to is the basic rules, you would tap out like mammoth. You don't even get the cool giant beasts. You don't get giant ape or Tyrannosaurus Rex or something. This is one of those things, I think, if you're playing a druid and you really want to go hard in on the wild shape, or be a moon druid, the DM ought to make some custom beasts for you to turn into. Like, oh yeah, you fought this like legendary unique creature and won the battle against it, but you can also turn into it now. I think that's pretty cool, and definitely a way to smooth out some of those gaps in the CR, because otherwise you're stuck with what the monster manual has and what beasts your DM is going to give you access to, as opposed to just something that's balanced for your class and the like. So that's what I think about shape and 5e. I'll just jump right to it. After that, we jump to 18th level, Timeless Body. I've never seen this come into play. It's cool. It's an interesting thing. It's neat to think about. Never seen it impact a campaign whatsoever. And the final one is Beast Spells, which takes you 18 levels to be able to cast spells while you're an animal. So, that's different than it was before, but I think that's probably fine. I've only seen this in play once with another player, and it seems like it's really fun, especially when you closer you get to level 20 and you get more uses of your wild shape. And, no matter what form you're in, you don't need the verbal, somatic, or non-GP related cost material components. You just do magic. It just happens around you. I think that's really cool. It's just this weird thing that the Archdruid gets that I once more is like, they're swimming in the same thematic waters as the wizard. And I think that's appropriate. Merlin can be a wizard or a druid, I think. And so it's appropriate that they are really good at magic. And even if it's just a certain kind of magic. As for the circles, yeah, they're all over the place. Starting with Circle of Dreams, you have this are they a party support caster? Are they they're doing stuff with teleportation and dream magic, but there's all kinds of stipulations around it. It really does feel like there's a concept there of a druid connected to the Feywild and the summer courts of the Feywild, as it were. But the execution of it feels really poor and confusing. And one of those where every time I look at it, I read the flavor text. I'm like, man, that's cool. That's really interesting. And then I read the class descriptions or the subclass descriptions, and it's just like, wait, what? When would I use this? How would this be applicable? This seems like a very niche case, so it seems like it'd be tricky to work. But, if you're one of those players where concept matters over execution, this is dripping with flavor and a lot of really cool story implications for you. So, I'm glad it's here, even if it's a little wonky. Next up is Circle of Spores, which is just hard to build a character for. It's mad. You gotta have a really good dexterity to get the highest AC you can get. But that feature of getting 4 times your level in temporary hit points is pretty nuts. And if you can make it to 20th level and have basically unlimited uses of that whenever you want, it's pretty awesome, I think. I've really only looked at the Circle of Spores sort of in a theory craft sense. It's one of those that I've not had an opportunity to play, but I like the idea of there's sort of a kind of a narrative justification for there being a kind of natural undead. This is a skeleton, but it's still got life in it. The mold and creepy crawlies all over it that are decaying and breaking down that body. That's a kind of life. If that's what's infusing it, if that's where the animus comes from, I think that can be kind of interesting to explore. So yeah, Circle of Druid. This is the last of my. I'll play this druid to see if I, see what I think of the class, but I just haven't had a chance to play it yet. Circle of Stars is another one of those really cool concepts for druid. Very complex class, lots of decision points to make. Completely completely changes how you interface with wild shape. Definitely one of those classes that when I looked at it, I was like, man, we could have used this a year before it came out. I was trying to cobble together a kind of Circle of the Cosmos for Pruitt's original Spelljammer campaign. And Circle of the Stars was dead on what it is I think that we were looking for. Conceptually, I love this subclass. Lots going on, and there's a lot of decision points. It's a more complex full caster that offers a lot of different options for how you play the game, and it's really fun. I like it. And then the next Circle of the Land, very simple. Really depends on which of the terrain types you pick, how good this subclass is going to be. A lot of the other features that you get are passive. And while they might not come up much in the campaign, when you have them, it's pretty handy. You don't have to worry too much about, oh, did I also use this other ability? Like as a druid, you're already tracking wild shape uses, spells per day. Adding stuff on top of that to me is a bit much. Whereas you have those other subclasses like say spores or stars that are doing a lot with bonus actions and reactions, things like that, other uses of things that you're tracking. Circle of the Land is just, do you want to play as close as you're going to get to a second edition Druid? There you go. They're not going to be as good in melee as a second edition Druid was, but they're going to be fun to play. And then Circle of the Moon, I think, through across the lifetime of 5e's trajectory, I kept thinking like, man, they're going to do something with Circle of the Moon. They're going to turn it down, something. But it's from first level to 20th level, I've seen it be a blast to play. I've never played it out of tier 1, which is where it's strongest, and I can attest to that. It's quite satisfying. But I've been at a table with Moon Druid who's wild shaping every turn, new hit point pool every time, and I've still seen them drop to 0 because they took more than their wild shape and their hit point totals. So that's how it goes. Very fun class to play, strong concept, and you're a full caster on top of it. So there's that. Right? Shepherd. That this is my 10th level Circle of the Shepherd died in the Tomb of Annihilation, ripped apart by skeletons in the cauldron room of Papa Zodel's tomb. So R.I.P. To him. It was quite spectacular how he went down. I don't think I ever actually summoned anything in the time I played him. There was never really a good fight to do it. And it was either like would have slowed things down or wasn't it's like, oh, we're trying to be quiet here or something. So I can't comment too much on the summoning aspect of them. But I found it to be an interesting class with managing a totem and sort of giving boosts and buffs that way, as well as being more caster focused as a druid was interesting play experience. But it did not take long for him to go down. It did not. And then Wildfire, the blaster healer pet druid, seems way too finicky for me. And there's no fireball. Come on. Light clerics over here gonna toss around fireballs, and no real way to deal with like fire resistance or immunity, which I think if you're gonna lean hard into one damage type as a subclass, you really ought to have like, here's how you overcome damage and immunity to it. There's a couple of the necromancy themed subclasses that deal with this in different ways, but the subclasses for Druid are all over the place, both in terms of the complexity versus the simplicity, which I think is a good thing. Allows players to, pick what level of engagement they want to have with the rules. But not all the mechanics there are executed well, and some of them are more complex, not because they are well executed and just have a lot of options, but because they're sort of require the player to do a lot of work to make that build work and to get that druid to find a niche within the party that they can fulfill and excel at it. Overall, the biggest things about druid I find are like their low AC and low hit point really is a sore spot. Like bards can pick a magic secret to help with this. Clerics have subclass options that give them heavy armor. Sorcerers, wizards, and warlock all have different spell and class ability options to help with this. If you're really worried about, having low AC or survivability as a wizard, you can play an Abjurer, right, or a Blade Singer or something like that. When you have that option with the moon or spores here, this is one of those like the spell list ought to help here. There ought to be more going on. And I think Barkskin's a fantastic spell. It just requires concentration. And I think that's the real killer. Because if you get hit, you fail that check, now you've lost your AC buff. And it's like, wait, wizards over here getting an AC buff that lasts 8 hours and they don't have to concentrate on it. 1 hour concentration AC buff. All right, come on. I think even leaving it at an hour, getting rid of the concentration, for Barkskin at least, would be fine. And, the other ones they can keep, Stone Skin, things like that. But another one is that all of their spells require concentration practically. Offense, defense, debuff, area control, all kinds of things. Now, there's a lot of fantastic spells in there, right? But the fact that your options for like, I'm laying down an area control spell and then having something that you can also use to blast away at the enemies or, or single target damage, that kind of thing. To me, there's just like one or two spells here that could make a real difference for the Druid. And I find most of the time when I'm picking spells and playing with them, I'm really like, man, I'm concentrating on one, and I'd love to cast another that also is concentration. And to me, that's the kind of choice that it's rarely a satisfying one in the moment. And it usually also feels very limiting, or like, I guess I'll keep doing what I'm doing because I already cast that spell. And then I'll cantrip away. I don't know, but I think right now I'm just describing what it's like to play a spellcaster in 5e full stop. So it's not necessarily a dig against the Druid. And so, like, to think of like what I would like to see in terms of improvements, what I think still needs filling in terms of the concept supported. I want to see most of these things addressed through both like separating the Druid from the monster manual. I think that's step number one. Just everything you need to play a Druid is in the Druid class description, or the spells, right? Like, you're going to be able to summon things, and in the spell it will tell you what the stats for that is. And you're going to be able to turn into all kinds of creatures, and the class description will provide those. That you shouldn't have to ask for a whole second book to get all the information about your class. That's the foundation for a lot of what I would improve with it. And then the other is like tweaking the spell list. What's concentration, what's not? Are more versatile damage types covered, right? The spell list leans heavily on lightning and fire damage, but you can have some more damage types in there of different kinds. More poison damage, more acid damage, more thunder damage, different types. I think you could probably justify a little bit more radiant or necrotic in some situations. Just a little bit more, one or two more spells level. There's certainly levels of the Druid spell list where I just am like, what I don't want to take any of these. None of these are applicable right now. So tweaks there. And then finally, like, expand on the options for non-animal based melee Druids. We try to do this in Weird Wastelands. Our Circle of a Broken Land is there because, it's like you want to mix it up in melee. Cast spells, bring down the fury of nature upon your enemies, and not have to be a wolf or a bear or a mammoth or an elk or whatever to do it. And so we're doing something different than what the Circle of Spores does. But right now, Circle of Spores is your only official option for melee Druid that mixes it up and isn't wild-shaped at the same time. And to me, that is a core Druid concept that 5th edition has not served, right? Or is really only served through the Spores Druid, which has a weird flavor that you might not want with your Druid, right? It's not without its drawbacks. So yeah, that's my take. That's what I think about the Druid. I don't know. What do you guys think? Where's your head at? I hope that we see something interesting from One D&D with them. I'm not a fan of the new bark skin. But yeah, here we go. Benny Boy asks, why can't my Druid turn into a plant? Excellent question, Benny. Or an ooze, or a fae, or a dragon. Assumingly the CR would do a fine enough job of keeping things balanced. Maybe. Better than nothing. How would you implement expanding wild shape? I think, number one, monstrosities. I don't like the monstrosity category of monster. I think it's just weird. It's the catch-all, like miscellaneous junk drawer of the monster types. There's all kinds of animals on it, like owl bear, cockatrice. that I think they have at least enough of a natural, whatever that means in Dungeons and Dragons, animal parts to them that you could justify it. And it's similar with plant and ooze and fae. I think those are all viable options either for subclass, like something that's different than Moon Druid that expands the options that you can turn into, might be one. Or just like feats or optional class features for the Moon Druid that allow them to turn into things like that. This is the kind of thing that in my campaign, if I had a Moon Druid was really into this, we're doing this just custom homebrew. Like, maybe they find an order of druids that, is sheltered or protected by, like an ancient dragon or something like that, and they've honed their wild shape abilities so that it puts them in tune with their, draconic souls, that kind of thing, or similarly with like plants or fae. I think it could be really, really interesting. Fae might be tough just because of spell-like abilities, because it's like, all right, I'm going to turn into a pixie and have all kinds of other magic that I could cast. But it's not like an insurmountable design hurdle to figure out how that might work. So, yeah, the answer is why? Because second edition, first edition didn't do it. That's absolutely why. The fifth edition Druid really is leaning hard on nostalgia and legacy for a lot of its justification, and they are an outdoorsy wizard type thing that can also turn into critters. I suspect the real answer is also the Sword in the Stone movie, the shape-shifting battle between Madame Mim and Merlin, and it's the first image that came to my mind when I read the Druid in second edition. I was like, oh, that's Druids go through shape-shifting battles just to be able to level up. Sweet. Excuse me. J Smith asks, would you buff Circle of the Land? And if so, then how? I think it could deserve some tweaks, right? I think the spell lists could deserve a few tweaks here and there. There's some questionable choices like Arctic. Do we really need Ice Storm and Sleet Storm? Like, Sleet Storm does everything I would want out of a spell like that. Ice Storm's terrible as a spell. Like, we could do some other things, some other interesting things with the spell list. So I would tweak the spell lists, and I think I would the 14th level feature of like, okay, plants and beasts have to pass a wisdom save, which you're probably not going to be good at. To attack you is neat. Like, you effectively don't have to worry about two whole types of monsters that you might encounter, but plants and beasts are hardly the kinds of monsters I expect to encounter when I'm 14th level druid. And like, this is one of the things I think, where 5th edition, in trying to like honor the legacy of D&D, it gives, perhaps should have been less literal in it. And just like, yeah, we were designing it in the spirit of it. We're designing it for this edition, because as a druid, you used to just get all this by like 3rd level in those editions. These were all things you'd get pretty early on, and you just enjoy these little benefits through the majority of your adventuring career. Things like, yeah, I can walk around the wilderness and tromp around here without any problems, where the animals just ignore me. I don't have to worry about, the wolves on the encounter table or something like that. But with 5th edition, with it's like the way the subclass breakdown, like, they got to put those things at a certain level, and too often I find like, oh, this is a neat class feature, but I would love this way sooner. To me, this is like a character defining thing, or something that could be really interesting in like, early tier 2 play. The ability to be like, have every beast and plant I come across, and I'm like a 5th or 6th level adventurer. That's big and impactful. By the time you get it at 14th level, you're like, I'm going to forget this, and is it ever going to come up? So to me, that's what I do. I just sort of rearrange some of them. I think like the immunity to the conditions for elementals and fae is another one of those. Yeah, when it comes up, that's going to be really interesting. I cannot think of any elementals that charm or frighten. Maybe genies is what it refers to, but I don't really think of druids and genies having much to do with each other. So yeah, I don't know. Like, there's some things with Circle of the Land that I kind of expected to see in Circle of Dreams, a druid that's connected to the Feywild. I think if I would buff Circle of the Land, it would be just lean in heavier on buffing their spellcasting. And of things like, yeah, the elemental damage that you do, bypasses resistance. Or, you can, you get a little bit extra whenever you cast a certain spell or something like that. I think that's kind of how I'd go with it. Let's see. All right, who else do we have? All right. So we got Levy. What druid do you think original Merlin would be back when he was a druid rather than the modern incarnation of wizard? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think land is the answer, right? Like the dragons of Britain are what power Merlin's magic, and it's the connection to the dragon, to that force that moves through the land of the British Isles that gives Merlin's power. At the same time, Merlin's kind of a prophet, kind of he's living his life backwards, right? That's why he's able to advise Arthur and the like on all these things, because he's already sort of lived through them, experienced them, and seen them, and he's like meeting Arthur at this coming the other way, and kind of like the doctor and his wife, I forget what her name was, Doctor Who, where it's like they're coming at each other from opposite timelines, heading in different directions, and so he's able to like give all this advice and like, this is what you should do, this is how it should go down, and also like be wary of these things. You need to watch out for these are the portents of doom, for when the end is nigh, and you do what you can to avert that fate, or just accept it. So I think like land would be good, but you'd want to, I feel like I want to steal divine portent from divination wizard. That's what I want, and I'd try to find some way to finagle it as a player. But just let me have this little bit. Come on, I'll give up. I'll give up the plants and animals don't bother me, kind of thing. But or a custom spell list is another way to do that. There's already some wizard spells on the druid spell list, like scry, things like that, that I'd want. Like augury would like to be there. Yeah. Divination would be another one. But yeah, you could do a custom spell list for Merlin. But land, I think, is definitely the one I would go with. Also because it's the more subtle one, right? Like, you're not turning into a bunch of things, and you're not summoning your astral body as a constellation or around you, or like burning down the forest sauvage or anything like that with your wildfire magic. It's subtle. Needs more illusions on the spell list, though, to be a proper Merlin. More glamours, things like that. Good question. Yeah, to me, in D&D, there's a world where D&D has 3 spellcasting classes, and they roughly break down in concept to like white, black, and red mage, I guess from Final Fantasy. But like the idea of this is someone that uses their magic for good purposes, right? Like a white necromancer, it's in the color scheme. They use their mastery of life and death to heal others and help others and things like that, not to harm or hurt. It's more about like what you do with your magic and the kinds of effects you produce. But to me, like a druid sits there like adjacent to the wizard. Like they're both at the council of the wise. Like they both studied under the same ancient masters and the like, and learned their magic in similar ways, but they're just different enough to justify the two classes. But yeah, my first edition wizard spent a lot of time with a druidic order, teaching them lightning bolt and several other spells in exchange for some of their magic, because they do share that overlap. Let's see. Some other questions here. We got Nothing to See Here asks, how do you keep non-moon druids distinct? They can tend to just come off as nature wizard subclass. I mean, yeah, they can. To me, I see that obviously a little bit less of a drawback, but it does lead to a lot of blurriness, right? And I think like the strong thematic subclassers, get tongue-tied real quick. These strong thematic subclasses that the druid has that enhance their full casting. Things like Circle of Stars or Wildfire. That's the way to go. They really lean on and provide access to new spells. They really lean on these themes and the like. Whereas, yeah, I think Circle of the Land Druids can come across as like, well, okay, so you're coastal instead of swamp or whatever. But it's just you have a couple of extra spells that are different than the other druids. Less heavy theming there compared to some of the other full caster subclasses. So I think like one of one of the mages that or not mages, but druids I want to see is like leans heavily into natural disaster magic, right? Like that, this is the druid that summons tornadoes and earthquakes, and that causes the oceans to rise. Like there's not subtle. There's no magic here that's minor. Everything, like, it affects everyone. No one's exempt. They're summoning a natural disaster and then trying to master those forces. Mechanically, I'm not sure how that would work out. It seems like a lot of power to put into a character at low levels, but I like the theme of that. This is the druid who's here to, like, all right, well, they say that nature is terrible and powerful. This is the one this is the druid who taps into that. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it really is about what kind of theme of nature magic you want to lean into, and providing mechanical features that support that theme, along with whatever custom spells they might need for that. So yeah, good question. Let's see. Yeah. Fergus Hatley asked, do you think Druid spells have too many concentration spells? They have so many to choose from, that'd be really nice to actually use more than one in a fight. Amen. Yes, I do think that. Like I said, I think I confused myself earlier when I was like, my fix for it. But to me, the answer for it is, like, you can concentrate on a defense spell, except AC boosters. To me, that is a non-starter. Period. But concentrate on a defense spell, and it's the fire and forget ones. Like, I'm cast heat metal on. It's that spell's on them now. I'm not. It's loose in the world. That's kind of how I see it. But yeah, I do think there's too many concentration spells, and sometimes you only get one round out of a concentration spell, and that's just how it goes. But I think there's, just looking at them from the perspective, like, is it, how engaging, how fun is this going to be to play, is something that designers ought to take into account as well. Let's see. Wilfredo asks, if your druid casts Primal Savagery, but then holds that spell and bonus action Wild Shapes, obviously a mood druid, obviously, would you allow that nat weapon damage to be added to the released Primal Savagery damage? I mean, you're given you're holding on to it. You're casting the spell with your action, your bonus shaping. You're waiting a whole round to make this attack. You could just, like, make the Primal Savagery attack Wild Shape, and then make the regular attack the next round, and it sort of works out similarly. So I don't see any problem with it, just because of how it works out. To me, I was thinking, like, Primal Savagery is one that, like, makes it's a natural attack, but it's like acid damage or something. I've never used it because it was like, why doesn't it just give me a natural weapon? Why is it doing this other kind of damage? If anything, what I'd like to see is, like, for Moon Druids specifically, like, these are spells that don't, the material component is that you're an animal. And then there's no other, requirements. And they're like little bonus action, riders for your attacks or things like that. I'm not sure that Moon Druids get the ability to, like, have their attacks be magical. I might have missed that and just, like, completely eyes glazed over it. But something that, like, boosts their damage or boosts their attack when they're in animal form could be really cool. Even if it's just like a Divine Smite type thing. Like, they can already kind of heal by spending spell slots. We could go the opposite direction and let them add elemental damage by burning a spell slot or something. I'd rather do that. If I had a player who was, like, trying to do this, like, in order to have more powerful natural attack, I'd be like, let's solve this another way. Good question. Let's see. Cody asks, how do you handle communication to NPCs or other PCs from the Druid once it is in animal form? Obviously, a raven can speak common, but I've heard of other DMs setting rules that limit speech. Here's how I handle it. Your Druid communicates through paws and grunts, and, they can still write if they have some kind of appendage or something, and there's a place for them to, like, scratch in the dirt or something like that. Like, their mind and animal's body, basically, and so, there's other ways to communicate. My pets communicate with me all the time. We, of course, speak no common languages other than mammalian. And so, there's all kinds of ways. So, like, as the rest of the party is around the druid when they're in bear form, they get to know the bear druid grunts and snorts and, head shakes and scratches and things like that. Or the wolf's whines and howls. And maybe the druid tells them, when I sound like this is what, I laid that as a foundation for it so that the party can continue to talk to each other and communicate. And even though the druid's in wolf shape, the player is still talking to the rest of the party because that's the game. I'm not going to have a player sit out of that part because the character they want to play like that. It's also why I don't like Kenku. But every now and then we check in and go like, oh yeah, you say this, what, as a dog, as an eagle? Like, how are you letting the party know that? Especially if the druid is like center stage communicating with the rest of the party and also wild shape. Like, all right, it's going to be hard to lay down a complicated plan when you're an eagle, or to describe exactly what you saw at the enemy fortress when you flew over it. That kind of complexity, you're going to have to talk to them. Maybe there's a spell that we can make up that will let you do that. Maybe one of the party members has speak with animals. Then you can just chat with them all day long. Honestly, if I'm another party member and I've got a druid in the party, I probably will have a speak with animals spell prepared precisely for this reason. And so, yeah, I do that. This is why things like the gnome or the furbolgs or whatever ability to speak with animals I find so interesting, is because it also opens up this part of play for them. So yeah. That's also what spells like telepathic bond, things like that are for. So yeah. But to me, it's like the fiction that you give so that the players can still continue to play the game, and one of them doesn't feel like they have to sit it out. All right, let's see what else we got here. Let's see. So Astra Catastrophe asks, Druids are divine casters, and I suppose they are devoted to the forest, so it makes sense. What would you prioritize in a campaign that chooses to frame them more as a primal caster? I would challenge only this. The player's handbook as it is written says that most druids worship a god. I don't think that's how the play culture goes. I don't think how most druids I've DM'd for, most druids I play, they're not worshiping nature gods. The player's handbook is really heavily flavored by Greyhawk for its druid description. Even so far as to, like, they have to call out specifically, well, this isn't really how it works on the Forgotten Realms. They're really describing how it works in Greyhawk. Of there being, primal nature gods that druids are priests of and worship, and then sometimes they also worship the non-personified forces of nature, as a whole. But for the most part, they're there to worship Sylvanas and the other nature deities. So, to me, like, if I'm framing it more as a primal caster, which I think is really cool, and honestly, like, do we need two priests? Like, I think like, even if we reframe the druid as primarily a primal caster who's drawing on a type of magic that comes from the inner planes, that is expressed in the material world as the mixture of all of the physical elements of the multiverse in D&D, like the fire and lightning and ice and air and earth, all of those come together on the elemental plane, or the primaterial plane. They're mixed, they're added, the living creatures and the vital force of life that flows in from the Feywild and the like, to create existence. And that has a magic in itself that the druid taps into. When I think of it like that, magic's already a part of that. There is no separation of magic, and what counts as natural and unnatural can get really blurry, and you can customize that all kinds of ways. There's a lot of times druids will mention something about spirits or the essence of nature and things like that. Spirit is a term that D&D 5e loves to use and never defines, which is strength and a weakness, right? Like, the obsessive catalog everything part of my brain goes, that's ridiculous. You should not do that. What counts as a spirit? The more fluid, wishy-washy, intuitive, we don't need to commit to this part of my brain goes, oh, that's great. I love that. I love that there's a class of monster that has no class. So, perpetually at war with myself, but what's new? I think that the Druid as a primal caster is one that stands closer to the wizard. I think, they might learn some of their magic from the same source in that sense. It can also be a priest. It can be that these forces of nature, these primal forces, are also worshipped as divine or as having a divine quality. I mean, there are elemental gods. There's, all kinds of creatures that dwell on those planes, have dominion and control over the forces there, in the same way that the outer planar gods control concepts and ideas and philosophies and the like, And so it could be that the relationship between the primal deities, the deities of the inner spheres and the elemental planes, is fundamentally different than that between those of the conceptual realms, the outer planes, which are more about moral outlook and the kinds of the kind of ethical character that you are. And that's a different kind of devotion that requires a different kind of spiritual intercessor in the form of the cleric. And the druid is like, well, we honor and supplicate these forces of nature. They really don't care what we think of them. They're not there for our devotion or faith, but we can influence them. And there is a mortal intercessor who steps in and goes, all right, elementals, all right, fae, this is the mortal plane. This is the material plane. Time to step back. Druid's here. And I brought my ranger baby. And, so I think like that's how I would kind of frame it. It was like there's a primal magic at work in the world, and like the gods interact with it. Maybe the gods shape it. Maybe the gods came along after and just was like, oh, this place is already here. We'll just take it for ourselves. And the primal powers might have something to say about that. So I think that's really, really cool. And honestly, druids as divine casters is like, well, that's legacy. We don't have to keep that. I don't think it's a core part of their identity. I think you can do everything you want with druid, and they don't have to serve a god like the way a cleric does, but different, So yeah, I think that's a good place to stop, because there's so many world building questions in the Druid description. And I encourage you, if you've not read the description of the player's handbook classes, if you've not gone through and read those like 3 little paragraphs where it's describing each character in a little vignette, and then the bold, bold headinged little paragraph about where the magic comes from or how you became this class or something. It's very interesting. There's lots of world building questions going on. Druid, bard, lots of stuff that D&D just like throws out there. Yeah, all of existence is made of 4 elements. What? Including us? Including people? Including my character? We could do something interesting with that, but D&D just leaves it on the table for you to do with what you will. It's something I hope that the new version of D&D keeps, and the playtest packets have been kind of light on lore and the like, but I hope that they leave those things in, because it's there that the stuff of fantastic campaigns are made, memorable characters and the like. And I hope that you have those in your game in the coming weeks. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, hope you have a great meal, a feast. Enjoy it. If you don't, happy Thursday. And maybe just take the time off or whatever. But we won't be here next week because it will be a holiday. But got Pruitt coming in. We're going to hang out, spend some time together with good friends, have some food, and we will see you the week after for, who knows, maybe there'll be a UA we can talk about then. We will have fully digested it, much like our Thanksgiving meal. Until then, folks, have great gaming, and we'll see you later.